Well, we are back with more sports coverage, and in this video, I specifically want to focus on and shed some light on the recent WNBA CBA that has been posed as a landmark deal across multiple different sources that I've read through. It's something that I have not covered on this channel at all, to be quite honest. And from my own perspective, which is honestly just how this video is going to go, nothing too crazy. I've read sources, but I'm not going to worry about citing them here. I'm just going off of the natural flow of things in this one. My experience with women's basketball has been infrequent. I can definitely sit here admit as well that it wasn't something I was tuned into a whole lot in years past. One, I didn't really have access to many sports channels as it was that consistently to keep pace with a sport like the WNBA, which, especially when you go all the way back to like late 2010s and smack dab in 2020, that's naturally going to be on a program like ESPN2 or maybe somewhere in a localized setting that I would not have any way of gaining access to at that time. That was the main form of reasoning. It was not really a situation for me where it's like, oh, okay, this is a completely lesser product, so I'm just not going to show any interest in it at all. But it wasn't something that, compared to other sports like the Big Four, that I was consistently keeping in touch with. And at that point, in ways, it could have felt as though I might have been missing out somewhere, but at the same time, those other sports, especially at that time, were doing a good job of keeping the majority of people fed and gaining a lot of the attention. When you look at how the Big Four leagues are structured compared to the way the WNBA traditionally was, and the fact that they, being major leagues, are going to bring in a ton of revenue compared to what the WNBA had been struggling with for this whole time, it's not that difficult to see why the general exposure would be so low for such a long period of time. You also have to consider that the NBA is a funnel, essentially, to the WNBA. They're a subsidy. They are a direct beneficiary of a specific amount of funds. Not much, granted, that the NBA will provide to try to fund programming and operations in the WNBA. And there are still cases in which, even to this point, it's fallen incredibly short. So all in all, while women's basketball is something that had eluded me for a little bit in terms of the pros, it could be a little bit of my own lack of attention towards it in a way, and also the fact that in terms of promotion, in terms of output, it didn't nearly compare to that of other leagues with much higher payrolls overall, and the overall discrepancy in those funds in the first place, which is exactly where we get into the entire process and everything like that. And I'll make a point about that later on, especially with what I've read about it and heard about it, all the way through, essentially. But things would change for them, especially when we got into the college basketball scene. Now, I've been aware of different prospects coming through women's college basketball over the course of the years. Specifically, when you look all the way back and you hear for one of the first times about an A'ja Wilson taking reign in South Carolina and accomplishing what she was able to with that program, then ultimately doing what she has done in the WNBA so far. It's an amazing journey for a player like her to come in with that kind of expectation and over-exceed it in such a short period of time to where she's regarded as one of the best WNBA players to ever do it right now, and she hasn't even hit her 30s yet. That's how great of a player she is. But that's just a notable name. And traditionally, the WNBA has had some hallmark players. They have a great amount of talent, especially through my main exposure, sometimes hearing about them in Sports Illustrated magazines that I used to own as a younger kid. You'd hear all the time about players like Sue Bird and Diana Taurasi, Elena Delle Donne, Breanna Stewart, all sorts of players like that making their own kinds of impact on the game in ways that an entire audience from the widespread perspective couldn't really fathom in the first place and weren't really that knowledgeable about. And, we get into a stage where we enter the 2020s and we have players like Stewart and Wilson getting older. Meanwhile, Bird and Taurasi are out of the league as of the recording of this video, promptly retired, and more than likely, Bird is already in the Hall of Fame. And I believe that Taurasi is going to be a candidate, but she has to wait through the 5 years of eligibility like most players in this situation. There's no doubt that with what she's accomplished in her career, she's going to be able to reach that. But you're at a crossroads. You have that talent coming out, and while there are still a good crop of players coming through, the league to this point of time is still struggling to take that next step, struggling to turn a profit, even struggling to get themselves into the main stratosphere. And it's not like it was a call for desperation, I should say, but the way in which these conditions were, to the point where you had players in a situation like Brittany Griner's having to work in the WNBA on a severe, not even, I won't say severe, but you are essentially having to work in multiple facets. You have to serve as a WNBA player on a low base salary, and then for overseas action or for action after the season ends, you then have to rely on overseas travel and cross-country even experiences just to try to make more money for yourself off of the court. Sponsorship deals are also going to be a factor, but even those can only go such a long way. And again, to not take it to this realm, but we all understand what happened with Brittany Griner in that situation to this point. And the fact that it even got to a sequence where she was a prisoner of war, taking, all of the other stuff aside when it came to the hashish oil that she had in her luggage or whatever the case may be, the full scope of the situation was that she was trying to go over there to play overseas basketball to make even more money for herself that the standard WNBA contract at the time wasn't providing. And I think there you have a turning point. That was probably one of the major turning points to where it was decided, I guess, maybe on the part of the players and maybe from a general consensus even, that it's like, okay, something has got to change here, because we are actively having our fellow players, from their own perspectives, we are actively putting them in danger just to try to make sure that they can keep the food on their table and provide for their families and maintain their standard ways of living. to have to put themselves in foreign areas that they aren't even that familiar with and expose them to all of these different tensions that they, I won't say don't have any business getting wrapped up in, but when you consider all they're trying to do is keep it basketball and keep their own lives in check, that is such a huge burden to put on each and every single one of them. And so we have to find a way to protect them and make sure that they are duly compensated. This has been something that has been battled for years, even going all the way back to a year like 2020. It's always been up for debate, generally across women's sports. But over the past few years, it has admittedly gotten louder. And that also is aligned with the general rise in exposure. The college basketball scene has especially been a massive credit to that. Namely, when you look at players like Caitlin Clark, especially when you look at players like Angel Reese, Fledjay Johnson, Raven Johnson, still at South Carolina now, and a whole list of other players that, I could rattle off. But for the sake of time, I'm going to try to be as brief with that as possible. All those kinds of players, especially Caitlin Clark, potentially in some cases being four-year players in her case, and setting multiple NCAA records in points and assists and field goal percentage, and putting that Iowa team on her back as an Iowa kid through and through, and helping them reach new heights as a program, especially in women's basketball. South Carolina, in their dominance in college basketball since Dawn Staley has been the head coach. Now she's pushing herself as South Carolina is actively in the midst of trying to go on another championship caliber campaign. They are also a program that has very much put themselves into the upper echelon of that scene. UConn, it goes without saying, what Gino Auriemma and those guys and girls consistently do at that program is incredible. Do you understand that UConn, quite literally, as we speak, is on an active 50-plus game win streak, and one of the only teams to outdo that kind of performance would be John Wooden's teams that won around 88 games in a row when he was head coach during that era of elite UCLA men's basketball play, and UConn themselves winning over 100-plus games consecutively in between the early 2010s and around like 2017 or something like that. That's their only competition. And UConn, literally in one of the recent games in the second round of March Madness for the women's bracket, they were up 65-12 at halftime on Syracuse. Because you have women like Sarah Strong and AZ Fudd leading that squad and leading them well to just dominate teams left and right. Then you have, different players all over the years. Whether you have your Haley Van Liths from TCU and LSU beforehand, just putting out some solid tape for different coaches and teams in the WNBA to look at and build themselves a solid fan base as well with how this recent exposure has gotten. The way in which these games have been played, especially when you get into the March Madness scene, you have a chance to get a lot of eyes on you. And man, in between 2023 and 2024 especially, in both of those instances, the skill level with which these women were able to go out there and play their styles of basketball and go toe-to-toe with each other and have these games come down to the wire over and over and over again, it made it a compelling product to watch. And little by little, you started to have people of all sorts tune into not only just the March Madness games, but even for a few games in the regular season as well in this sport. And it made for some of the highest viewership in women's basketball, point blank, period. And naturally, it spilled over into the WNBA with that kind of talent coming in. Caitlin Clark herself, in her rookie season, helped to have the Indiana Fever set multiple attendance records, set multiple viewership records in that season to instantly turn them into a box office caliber team, as she would go on to have herself a hot start to her career. And other players of that kind, like Angel Reese, like Camilo Cardoso, who would also be drafted to the Chicago Sky, I believe, they'd start to carve out their own fair share of performances as well. The players already in the league, like Sabrina Ionescu, like Jewel Lloyd, like Skylar Diggins-Smith, like, there are just so many different players that have their own compelling stories to tell and their own distinct narratives to follow. Even a player like Chelsea Gray, also of the Aces, I believe. Just a lot of good players putting out quality basketball. But still, to this point, even with the fan base seemingly increasing, even with the, level of competition as well, the level of talent in the league surging, it seemingly an all-time high, even though the WNBA has clearly had Hall of Fame caliber talent in their league since its inception. This had been an unprecedented time for them. And they still had the idea of putting these players in situations where they were underpaid, undercompensated, and quite frankly not put in the best possible conditions. There were different allusions to them having chartered planes and apartments to live in that still were not providing them with the resources that they actually needed to sustain a quality way of living throughout the season and beyond. And these negotiations had to go through a long process of carrying on, but as Sharanya would state last week, a true landmark deal in every sense of the word. $7 million in terms of salary for every single team. The ability to have at least one Supermax contract on every single one. It is amazing work. And even though it might not necessarily compare, it is a step in the right direction, all things considered. What the hell did the Aces do immediately after having that news break? They signed Aja Wilson to a Supermax contract of $1.4 million. And again, well-deserved for her. It now makes it where there are a lot of different steps they have to go through in terms of getting their free agency set, in terms of getting their expansion drafts together, and in terms of setting up each and every single one of these rosters before the start of the season. But man, there is finally understanding that with the social media exposure, with the now combined exposure of just a general fan base of potentially women, other demographics of that nature, and also even men from time to time being willing to sit down and say that they're going to actively watch a WNBA game and watch these specific players go out and perform at a high level. It's truly amazing to see. And we are just getting started, because the talent is just continuing to reign in. Two other players that stand out as, just absolute studs in their own respective ways are guards in Notre Dame's Hannah Hidalgo and also Vanderbilt's Michaela Blakes. That woman literally put up a damn near triple-double in the second round of Vanderbilt's tournament for the Commodores in what continues to be a successful season for their football and basketball programs all around. Sooner rather than later, those are players that are going to be entering the WNBA draft and trying to carve out their own careers as they display the best of their talents. You have other players actively in the league, even some of the older people, like a Kelsey Mitchell, like an Erica Wheeler, continuing to perform incredibly well, even in their respective stages. So there are a lot of different positives to follow here. And it shows to me that, even if we were not always aware of it or always paying attention to it for some reason, clearly these women can go out and play the game just as well, if not better, than some of the men out here do. It is as simple as that. And it took a while for people to be put on notice, but ultimately, the influx of talent, the incredible exposure that has been gained over this course of time, and the fact that you now, on most of these teams, have at least a marquee player to look into, to root for, as a general fan, maybe as a member of the respective teams. It gives you something that you have to pay attention to now. You can't deny them their right to be seen and truly heard from anymore. Because the relevancy for them is starting to tip in the right direction. And at a far faster rate than it ever has before. So that's my main perspective on it. It is still a large discrepancy, but you do have to start from somewhere. And it does with, this going down with the fact that they created unrivaled a few different players themselves as a result of those same things I mentioned with Brittany Griner and having them play in country to, win potentially larger prizes than their average salaries. Consider that, you compare it to at least maybe 6 figures, maybe 7 figures for some of the best players on these teams. The average salaries for some of these players were as low as less than $100,000. Caitlin Clark came in and was making as one of the top prospects, point blank period, coming out of Iowa in the 2024 WNBA draft, even with sponsorships in mind. Because with a player like that, she's going to be just about everywhere, and that makes a ton of sense to me. Her base salary was just at around $67,000. That is peanuts compared to the improvements that they've made on this now. And with a lot of this star talent coming forth to the league in the future, it sets them up fairly well to not only know that they are going to be able to contribute well in this league, but know that in at least some way they are being paid well for their work and don't have to go through all these different risks that the last generation of players had to worry about. And when you are trying to build a sustainable product, that's ultimately what matters the most. Now, I've mentioned it several times, this exposure in the league has grown at an incredibly high rate. That brings me to another point about this from my own perspective. It means that now everybody's watching. And so the WNBA, in more ways than one, needs to be able to move and adjust to that accordingly. Because I've spent minutes on end, even if I can't put every name to the face, even if I can't provide all the different numbers every single way through what I'm saying, I can outline all those positives like that. And intentionally wanted to go out of my way to highlight all those positives. Because for as much time as I can sit here and do that on my end, you can find people over the past few years spending double that, triple that, focusing solely on how the popularity of the WNBA has increased for some of the worst reasons imaginable. Not doing this to, say anything particularly out of the blue or just completely reckless on my front, because that's not what I intend here. But when you look at how some of the things have happened here, go back to that game in, March Madness. I think it was the Elite Eight, Final Four potentially, between Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and the LSU Iowa teams. And from then on, just because you had Caitlin Clark do this and you had Angel Reese respond back, because LSU would eventually win that game. You had her respond back with her right near her doing the same thing, mocking her, yada, yada, yada. We then proceeded to have so many different people from all over the place. Sports media, just general commentary, and even in the political sense, getting involved with this, making it out to be a sort of racial rivalry for some reason. And that has just devolved into way worse context for both players. Because we just keep on nitpicking about, Caitlin Clark clearly did this. Oh no, Angel Reese has to come out and say, okay, I was a part of this too, and I want my own kind of respect here in that sense. You have Angel Reese out here cheering on teammates, seemingly, including Kennedy Carter, when there were flagrant fouls committed on Caitlin Clark, and that devolved into death threats sent her way. The fact that Caitlin Clark also has suffered a lot of flagrant fouls from multiple different players. And a number of different rumors have been made for that to be, reasoning as to why this is happening. Maybe they're just so naturally toxic that I don't even want to give them light here. But I've heard nothing but craziness in that sense. They're jealous of her. They're jealous of what she apparently represents. They're jealous of her makeup and how it's seemingly made out to be the perfect standard for any person to come right through and potentially save their league. The fact that a younger rookie is able to come in and be credited with that kind of boost in production compared to some of the other established veterans that have been in this league for a lot longer. To some extent, As human beings, they may have a right to feel that way. In some other cases, the numbers, the attendance numbers, the jersey sales also don't tell that much of a lie. Say what you want about the state of Iowa, Caitlin Clark was more than a big deal, and then some, to them. And so you're going to naturally have that fan base transfer over and follow her immediately into the WNBA. It was a perfect chain reaction. They are well within their right to cheer for a player. And any person who's a fan of any one of these players has their right to do so. To have this devolve into a race war and eat up national media headlines over and over and over again in the midst of some of the more successful seasons in WNBA history, despite them still not turning a profit, it just made for such contradicting material. How is it that you are going to try to grow the game as best as you possibly can and showcase talent all over the place, being able to make an impact, and you are allowing drama like that to seep into daily conversation about the WNBA? We're not even focusing on true basketball anymore. It is always something negative everywhere you turn, especially in the 2025 WNBA season. Everywhere you turn, there was something else going down in a game. They didn't have anything to do with the basketball aspect of it, and didn't have anything to do with players truly showcasing the talents that they had on the court. No, it was anything and everything else getting in the way of that progress. It almost got too crazy to the point where, and again, it's not to just make this all about Caitlin Clark, but I was watching a Stephen A. Smith video like months ago, and there was apparently a situation where the WNBA got a letter from Congress or the Senate, one of the two. There was a chance that all the stuff that was going on involving Caitlin Clark and involving all these other players and these flagrant fouls got to such a point they were potentially thinking about posing a civil rights case. What? Just think about the weight of that for a second. You are in a situation where your league is growing exponentially better than it ever has. And you put your asset in such a dire situation to where she had to constantly, as well as Angel Reese, even because, again, of the nature of how every single person outside of that wanted to address this rivalry. Rivalries involving players are fine. But again, to have it devolve into a race war just makes it incredibly disingenuous and awkward for anybody else to respond to. The fact that Reese and Clark, being that young in their respective cases and having to deal with stuff like that. Angel Reese, I think, even herself dealt with death threats and dealt with disparaging comments as a result of all of this shit. And that kind of stuff cannot happen. But it got so fucked up to where, one, Caitlin Clark ended up missing pretty much most of the season with injury. Which, with the trend, although people were still tuned in, the marquee product at this time was Caitlin Clark. And with no Caitlin Clark, it made it harder and less convincing for some people to want to sit down and watch these games play. So there were different conversations about why are they self-sabotaging themselves? Then a civil rights case involving Caitlin Clark at the center. Do you know how bad that would look? the way in which civil rights cases involving and being centered around black people had gone in some cases years and decades back. And a precedent of this kind could emerge due to everything that's going down in your league under your watch. It's a terrible look and a terrible PR situation. Now, it didn't end up happening. It was more of a warning. And thank goodness. Because from an optical standpoint, you would have reset and just set back virtually each and every piece of your momentum imaginable in that situation. It just wouldn't even be a question at that point. Each and every single piece of evidence. And momentum, I should say. Because there were, different suggestions and allusions to all of that. And that's not even mentioning some of the different fan interaction stuff. If you know what I'm talking about, you know. I don't even need to say it here. I probably can't, because even saying that would probably get things age restricted on here. And there's no need for that to happen. And then the process itself. One minute, we are asking for this price. The next, we're potentially asking for more. Meanwhile, the Wnba playing hardball and not even for a while seemingly willing to even compromise at all, just leaves you out to dry on these negotiations, leaves you susceptible to all this different commentary, especially after the whole initiative of the pay us what you owe us thing, the t-shirts during the All-Star game in 2025 for, those players. Their statement was clear, and we still don't have a compromise whatsoever. The negotiations have been going on since 2024 because the CBA, the last one, was in 2020. So you understood that time was coming to make this happen, and you still weren't willing to conform? Okay, we're going to push the deadline back. We're still not willing to play ball? Okay, we're going to push the deadline back even further. Okay, you're asking for more? Oh, we most certainly can't allow that to happen. We're going to push this deadline back even more. The amount of times you heard about all these damn extensions taking place was ridiculous. They overextended the limits for their deadlines, in fact. And it got to a point where this carried over all the way into 2026. Just a few months before you have to cram in your free agency and your expansion draft and your actual draft and your training camp and your preseason. You're putting all of that in danger because you cannot come to a proper compromise that puts your best players at interest. It got to the point, near, I guess this was at, the end of the season, and maybe a little bit after that, Collier herself has to come out and call out WNBA Commissioner Kathy Engelbert for her entire role in this situation and just completely pop off and talk smack about how this was going. And at a point, you couldn't blame her. But once more, this is yet another avenue where the WNBA, even in a time of success and the hope for growth, you still have those flaws in your structure that make it difficult for you to truly move forward. There were people literally calling for Engelbert's job. That's how bad all of this was getting. Everyone's watching. Everyone is keyed in to see what else you do outside of this. Because at that point, it's not just about the money. It's about the entire culture in this league. If the goal is to uplift each and every single one of these players, no matter what they look like, no matter what race they are, no matter what sexual orientation they may possess, because that's also been a conversation considering how a good number of WNBA players do not identify as straight. Now that is also a different story and not exactly what I'm trying to get at in this particular video. You have all that going on in your league, and you have all that diverse talent to display. So why is it that all of your talent is seemingly not being treated in the fairest way? That is a fundamental issue that cannot last. It's about having a democracy, but to continue to have all this pushback and delays is also something that cannot happen. They were literally in danger. Even despite not turning a profit, they were in danger of having their first ever work stoppage. And that would have been cataclysmic for a league full of players that do not already get compensated properly. That would have been cataclysmic for the brand, especially. With Unrivaled, even though they're taking a huge risk with that, viewership for it dropped apparently, but that's still another outlet that these players can go to now and turn to and reject the WNBA outright. That was a conversation for a little bit as well when it was first created. So you have to put yourself in a situation where if you're the WNBA, you can't keep scaring these players off, and you can't scare the fan base away. Because again, while they hadn't been paying as much attention before, they have invested themselves into it now. And there's a chance for you to do that even more with this new media rights deal of like 10 years, $200 million. With the fact that ESPN and Disney programs hold consistent programming and control of the distribution of the content. That is a plus. You are in a great position and you cannot do anything on your end to put all of that to waste because of all these just very inconsistent tendencies. It just cannot happen anymore. You have to be able to give them just as much of a chance as the fans are willing to. Because if you don't, you're just going to lose more quality players. And you're going to just stave off the process of having younger, superstar caliber talent come into your league and add even more intrigue to the sport that people are looking for. And again, it does not, even when we get to that point, always have to be with the negative, with the dramatic sorts of things. It does help. And again, that's the conversation where it's like, okay, well, you know, in the NBA, in the NHL, the fights, the physicality, it's promoted. Why is that exactly? And again, I'm not here to make it a conversation like that. But you also have to understand, even if it's something that surely could exist in the women's game, it serves as more of a detriment because the WNBA is still not as established and trying to get on their feet and in the right path. I'm not saying that drama can't happen, but the headlines should not be about so-and-so player getting another flagrant foul on another superstar talent with the potential to increase viewership and increase the different profits and revenue that the league can attain over this time. At a point, it has to cease. There are talented players out there. You can't keep having the narrative be spread around all of the other stuff. Because these fans want to have something they can truly resonate with. And while the drama can be good every now and then for a few clicks, while the fan interaction stuff can be good every now and then for a few clicks, that's not sustainable. You to rely on that puts your entire league in a detrimental space. So they have to truly get that figured out. It is going to be interesting to see how they continue to progress. You want this to continue to be positive. And that should be the ultimate goal in all of this. Because it truly is a landmark deal. It truly is something that will go down in history as a potential turning point for not just the league themselves, but for each and every woman that in some way, shape, or form is involved with it. You just have to be able to put them in the best positions to succeed. And no, I don't expect them to have it all figured out. We're just a few days past it. This is just the first step in them being able to usher in a future filled, oozing even, with star talent from the college scene, younger talent in the WNBA, and the old guard continuing to perform in the fashions of which they have done throughout their entire careers. A consistent pattern and flow of production and positive PR will go a long way for them. So that is what I would say about it. And, hey, moving forward, it's going to be interesting to tune into or get a chance to tune into these games. Because they, again, we can understand that they always had the talent to do things of this sort at this high of a level. Unfortunately, we weren't looking in the right place, and now we are. So what exactly do they have for us? That remains to be seen. But that'll do it for this video. I hope you guys did enjoy the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.